Chapter 6, West Hollywood. Who is she? When we parted ways at the airport. Who is she on the entire flight home? Who is she? This thought continuously percolated through every day that we were separated. During my runs at a lunch with a client, keeping me up at night. Who was this woman, the woman that meant so much to him, she called to him in his dreams? We didn't speak directly of it, not on the long phone calls that spanned the time and distance between us. I sat one night on my back patio, curled up with a glass of crisp Chardonnay and my phone pressed eagerly to my ear as we passed the evening talking. I looked out at Santa Catalina, noting her ever-present shape against the fading sun. He was filling me in on the results of his admission of national radio and the implications that it had had thus far. People are commenting under my post on public Instagram with their guesses on if I'm in a relationship, he'd said, the voice coming in puffs as he walked and talked. But no one knows who I'm talking about, he said, leaving the last word unspoken. Yet. I heard shifting and rustling in the background, distracting me from what remained unsaid. What on earth are you doing? I asked with a laugh. Walking through the paths. One of my favorite things to do here, he said, obviously slowing his pace to the point that he was no longer breathing rapidly. He was at his estate in the Highlands of Scotland, one he had purchased for continued privacy. No one knew he owned it. He told me it was a sprawling property spanning several hundred acres, an oasis for him, completely hidden. No cap? I asked, teasing. One of the encumbrances of his fame. He never left a building without donning something to shield him from the public. No cap, he replied, a smile in his voice. A pause ensued. What are you thinking about? I asked quietly, taking a sip of my wine and holding the cool liquid in my mouth for a beat before swallowing. I'm trying to decide, he said with a careful tone. Decide what? What to say, he said after a moment. I knew what he was referring to. Divulging information about her. You don't have to say anything, I replied, when in truth my insides were screaming to ask about her. To know who she was and what she meant to him and what happened in the years away from each other. As long as you still plan on telling me, eventually, I can live with it. No, I can't. Are you sure? Yes. No. Without a Home was a labor of love for the French-born Ariel, and equally so for me. Lulite was in Paris putting together the final touches on the gallery in Europe, leaving much of the work in the States to me. The 12-hour days of planning, staging, and prepping left me exhausted and sufficiently busy to keep my thoughts from her. I would have been naive to think that he had been celibate for 5 years. As Lulite once said, for a young man bathed in fame, pussy falls from the sky. And it was always raining. The abundance of female attention that accompanied his profession never seemed to tempt him during our relationship. His fealty to me seemed unwavering. It was hard to imagine him reverting to meaningless entanglements with vapid models after the relationship of a lifetime. Hard to imagine, but not impossible. Ariel, Siobhan, and I were encroaching upon hour 9 in the gallery, finalizing all the intimate details before the show tomorrow. Ariel was beautiful, her brown hair cut neatly in a choppy bob, her young 30-something face graced with pale skin and a generous blush. She was so full of youthful passion regarding her work. We debated on the position and order of several pieces, allowing her to educate me behind the why of each of her decisions. This belonged here because of the intimate words exchanged between photographer and subject. The portrait of a woman sleeping in rags in front of a mansion in Savannah, Georgia, belonged at the front, she had said. The mansion was overexposed in the background and nearly taking over the woman in the foreground. Her body and pose creating a wild eye, catching a contrast. The difference is startling, oui? She needs to be in the beginning. she had said, tapping her chin with her slender finger, nodding to me in confirmation. She was decisive and forward and was only at the start of what was sure to be an incredible, impactful career. Siobhan was one of our new assistants, who in addition to a degree from the Pratt Institute, had experience with event coordination. She was nothing but a blur, pacing back and forth on the phone with this vendor and that client. She was newer to the gallery within the last 2 years and had already established herself as competent and professional. I was partially present and partially distracted. Hayes was coming, was perhaps already preparing to leave. He was going to come to the showing Saturday, record for an indeterminate amount of time, and then back to his full life. To say I was nervous was an understatement. The first most public appearance for the both of us in years. He had assured me that it would be no issue, that he would arrive near the end of the evening after most of the press had left and the chance of a leak of his whereabouts reduced to a minimum. And then, he had said, voice full of promise, we will go home. Nerves indeed. Solène? Siobhan asked, quirking a blonde brow at me. Sorry, yes, I said, tearing my gaze away from the riveting photo of the slumbering woman and to the confused look on her face. You good? She laughed slightly, shifting her hefty clipboard from one hip to the other with pale, toned arms. She was a young force to be reckoned with, and I hoped she would stay with us. A smile pulled at the corner of my mouth at her very LA question. I nodded in affirmation that I was well and gestured for her to walk with me back toward my office. She strode purposely with me, her short frame reaching only to my shoulder. I pushed the door to my office open and sank gratefully into my chair when she spoke. So what time is your guest arriving? She asked, looking down at her clipboard with a slight frown. I hadn't told her who it was yet, had only told Lulit at Hayes's direction. The less people that knew, the better, in his opinion. I was inclined to agree. I checked my phone before answering, seeing a text from one Hayes Campbell. I miss you. 3 words, so much meaning, and yet so many secrets still. I chewed my bottom lip looking at the message, trying to quell the enormous feeling that surged through me at reading them. He missed me. And I would be lying if I said that knowing that did not please me. They will be here at 9 and will be arriving with security through the rear entrance, I said, offering her small smile as my thumbs moved across the screen in a reply. Good. So, Lulit said, clinking her glass with mine, the hum of dozens of conversations and upbeat music in the background, causing her to lean close to me to speak. It was late, the crowd was thinning somewhat, and the night was a resounding success. Ariel was glowing, having sold nearly every piece so far, and handling the interviews and press with ease. She was chatting with a woman from Cura, listening intently before answering her questions with thoughtful responses. How was Ibiza? She asked, sipping her champagne and giving me a knowing look. I blushed almost instantly. It was good, I said, taking a drink from my own flute, feeling the carbonation fizz through my mouth and down my throat. My 3rd glass of the evening. Liquid courage. Explain, she said, noting my hesitation. I told her briefly of his nightmare and abruptness and his question about my past, about the wonderful sex and reconnection and adoration he gave me during our escape, of the sadness that puzzled me and seemed to control him at times. She listened attentively during my summary of events. How many people has he been with? She asked in her typical curt manner. I replayed our heated entanglement, realizing that in our days and nights together, I had never asked him, had never thought to ask him. I don't know, I said quietly, realizing my own foolishness. That he had not volunteered the information spoke volumes. Lulit waited a moment, reading my face. She bumped her shoulder with mine and checked her watch, gesturing to the time with her glass. Nearly 9. I think that would be very revealing, but choose your moment wisely. He has demons, Solène, she said, catching the eye of one of our faithful clients, Clint, and waved him over, effectively ending our conversation. one of an abundant number of rich white men in this city. Absent was his third wife, perhaps home with the children or in an exotic location. He was handsome, in his late 60s, and had purchased several pieces from us over the years. He was a prominent investment banker in San Francisco, and art from our gallery decorated his many homes. We shook hands and began polite conversation. "How was your summer season?" "The Hamptons." "Splendid." And so on. The small talk before clinching the deal. A familiar pattern along with a little leg that consistently sold art. There was a murmur that cut through the crowd not much later. The kind of hush and swell that usually accompanies the entrance of someone prominent, though it was subtle. An undercurrent. A fraction of the same moment years ago in this very gallery. I stumbled in my conversation with the aforementioned rich white man upon Hayes's entrance. I craned my neck to the back of the gallery. Hayes strode casually into the softly lit room, dashing in his suit and skinny tie, flanked by both Adam and Christopher. His brown hair was styled neatly, giving him a distinctly adult and mature appearance. He exuded fame and intrigue, of what sort was not immediately clear, but I knew. He found Ariel almost immediately and extended a hand to her without missing a beat. A professional going to the star of the evening first out of an abundance and politeness and respect. A gentleman to his core. He leaned down to listen to her, nodding and smiling as she introduced herself to him. He pointed to the photo behind her of the blistered feet and shoes, and they discussed for a few moments. He listened intently, occasionally brushing his hair and mussing it as he gave her his undivided attention. I watched him unabashedly, my heart leaping as it recognized him. Ariel then gestured to the photo at the front of the gallery, which I happened to be standing directly in front of. The smile that transformed his face upon finding me was beatific. He spoke gently to Ariel and indicated with a nod that he would be heading in my direction. The crowd parted for him as if by instinct, their bodies making room for this man without quite realizing why. Would I ever become accustomed to this? The way exchanging a mere look with him caused a shift inside me, my heart recognizing a piece of itself outside in the world. "Hi," he said when he reached me, leaning down and placing his large palm flat across my back. He pressed his cheek to mine in an imitation of the art world air kiss. He did in fact press his lips to my face and quickly whispered, "You look ravishing," before withdrawing and offering a true air kiss to Lilith. My chest heated at the contact, pooling warmth from my stomach to my throat. Those lips. He shook hands with Clint as I began the introductions. "Clint Morgan, this is Hayes Campbell. Mr. Morgan has been a long-time client of ours." "She's a hell of a woman. No one knows art like these two," Clint said, releasing Hayes' hand and grasping me familiarly by the shoulders, the champagne obviously influencing him. We had embraced on exactly 2 occasions, this being the second time. I cringed slightly, my smile tightening in reaction to this. Lilith grimaced as well, she not used to similar incidents with other clients. It was never comfortable, and we both did our best to avoid it. Something dark crossed over Hayes' features, his own polite facade slipping slightly, his blue eyes hardening, at the contact between my client and my shoulders. "Yes," he said, voice low but casual, an unmistakable edge to the word. He wrapped his fingers around my wrist underneath my gold bracelet and gently tugged me closer to his side, freeing me from the sweaty arm of Clint. "She is," he said, taking the narrow flute from my hand and saluting Clint with it before taking a sip from my glass. The gesture nonchalant but unmistakable. He was no client. Clint laughed, obviously not recognizing the true meaning behind Hayes' anything but casual gesture. "So, what do you do, Mr. Campbell?" Clint asked, snagging a small tomato-topped bruschetta from passing server and eating the entire thing in one bite, wiping his mouth with the corner of his napkin. Hayes glanced at me with an expression of concern. I nodded slightly, indicating that everything was okay. He replied to Clint without removing his eyes from my face. "I produce music, among other things," he said calmly, voice softening at knowing I was all right. "You know what? You look awfully familiar," Clint said to Hayes. The alcohol-induced flush caused a mild sheen to spread across his brow. My breath froze in my lungs. Would he recognize him? He studied Hayes for a moment before lifting a shoulder in a shrug and turning to ask Lilith a question about the photo behind me. She gave me a wink over his shoulder and turned him gently away from the two of us, subtly steering the young waitress with a tray of beverages away from one Clint Morgan. I let out a sigh of relief. Crisis averted. "He was interesting," Hayes said, as he again placed his palm in the small of my back, guiding me to the periphery of the crowd. "Occupational hazard," I said, taking my glass back from him and pressing it to my lips, my head pleasantly buzzing at this point. We eventually ended at one of my favorite pieces in the collection. It was a black and white photo of a homeless woman laying in the fetal position in the same frame as a large white sculpture of a baby in a similar pose. The sculpture, titled "Look Down," was from an Italian artist by the name of Diego, a breakthrough work commenting on the way the public views the unhoused. The woman is seen laying on a bench in the background with two large bags full of her belongings scattered around her. Two souls lost in one photo. "What do you think of this?" I asked, returning the drink to his waiting hand, and looked up at him. He was gazing at the photo, his chin lifted slightly. He looked tired, faint purple circles dusting his eyes, the creases at the corners more evident today than in Ibiza. He was supremely handsome, his broad shoulders draped in a fine black suit and tailored pants. His black boots upscale and distinctly him. A few people wandered behind us with occasional whispers. He seemed undisturbed by this, having complete confidence in his privacy. He thought for a moment, taking his lower lip between his teeth. "It's sad and beautiful at the same time," he said finally. "Sad and beautiful," I repeated. It seemed to me to describe the man who uttered those words. He smiled briefly, sensing my staring at him. His warm hand remained on my waist, and he gently pulled me closer to him. Though I was in heels, he still towered over me. He leaned down, brushing his nose across the curve of my ear and sending a shiver through me with the contact. "Is your office in the same spot?" he asked, lips brushing against my hair. I nodded mutely. He pulled away and gave me a wicked smile. "Meet me there in 5 minutes," he said, finishing the bubbly in 2 gulps and walking purposefully through the crowd before I could object. Precisely 6 minutes and 15 seconds later, I closed my door, locking it with a faint click, and turned around to be immediately surrounded by him. He pressed his palms flat on the door on either side of my face, and he leaned into me. He trailed his nose across my jaw, inhaling as he moved from my chin down to the neckline of my black Balmain dress. He hovered there and pressed a kiss directly above my pounding heart. "Why?" he began, voice husky, picking up my left hand and straightening. He brought my arm to his face and nuzzled it, placing a kiss at my pulse point in the crease of my elbow. "Didn't you respond?" he said, trailing his lips lower, slowly making his way to my wrist. "To what?" I asked, breathless already at his seduction and confused by the question. His other arm remained at my head, pinning me in place. "That you missed me too," he said, finally reaching my hand and placing another kiss in the center of my palm. I gasped at this, and he made his way to my thumb, his eyes intent on mine. "I'd rather show you," I said, voice coming out in a whisper. He chuckled into my palm. He kept his eyes locked with mine and gently licked across the smooth metal of his ring, marking me. He released me and cupped my face in his hands, our noses touching. He pressed his lips to mine, parting them with his own. His warm tongue insistent and impatient, hungry. His hands traveled down to my shoulders, where he applied slight pressure down. "Show me, Selene," he commanded, quietly. I sank to my knees and showed him how much I missed him. 4 minutes later, we emerged separately and strolled into the dwindling crowd. Ariel saw him first and waved him over with a sheepish smile. I trailed slowly behind him. My niece, she said, pulling out her phone and opening the camera function, is a huge fan, she said, in the French way, the H disappearing with her accent. May I have a photo with you, Ace? She asked. Her smile grew larger, her eyes hopeful. I stilled. This was uncharted territory for me. Before, he would have obliged willingly, generous with his fans, and always halting for a photo no matter what he was doing. This was the first time he had been recognized in public, and by Ariel no less. He smiled hesitantly and shook his head. Her expression faltered slightly, embarrassment coloring her cheeks at his refusal. He quickly produced a pen from his coat pocket and grabbed the napkin clutched in her hand. He unfolded it neatly and placed it against his left palm, writing a short note and finishing it with his signature. He handed it back to her and said, There, now we can take a photo. Relief covered her face, and likely mine too. I took her phone from her hands while Hayes left my side and approached hers. He wrapped a friendly arm around her waist, and she copied his movement. They posed while I took several photos. Before she parted, Hayes began opening the side of his suit and reached to the internal pocket, withdrawing his own phone. Would you mind? He asked her, flashing a winning smile and extending the phone to her. Her already pink cheeks grew even more flushed, and she nodded wordlessly, starstruck. I could only sympathize. Hayes motioned for me to come stand by him. My stomach bottomed out. Posing? With him? We had gone to great lengths to not be photographed together, timing our exit from our various adventures in avoidance of paparazzi. It seemed odd to willingly pose with him in the public eye. He sensed my hesitation and extended a hand to me, giving me a reassuring nod. I reached for him, and he clasped my hand with his ringed fingers and pulled me close. He wrapped his arms around me possessively, spreading his palm around my back and waist and clutching me to his side. We smiled together as the flash exploded from the phone. Our position, intimate and revealing. Lovers, not friends. Definitely not just lunch. It was late after midnight when we arrived in Malibu. We had stayed at the gallery for hours, waiting until the remainder of the guests meandered back to their swanky accommodations. No more than 10 minutes after the last person trickled out did Hayes drag me to Kit and the waiting SUV to make the short drive to the house. He didn't let go of my hand the entire drive. What are you going to show me now? I asked, striding closer to the grand piano in the corner. He had kissed me sweetly upon entering the room and led me immediately to the instrument and the minibar on the opposing wall. Hayes was seated at the bench, the skinny tie loose, combing through his styled hair. I assembled a tumbler of scotch and handed him the thick glass. Macallan 25. A step up from Laphroaig. Several steps up. He received the drink from me graciously, taking a sip of the amber liquid and promptly giving me a kiss, allowing me to taste the sultry, smoky liquid on his mouth. He smiled his half-smile, one dimple making a debut. He answered my question with a question. Remember Isabel's theory about her favorite artist? He asked, leaning away from me to place his glass on top of the cocktail table next to the piano. My jaw dropped. No way. I told him during one of our phone calls that Isabel's list of hints that led her to believe that a one Ms. Swift would be releasing an album any day now. Hayes had listened intently, laughing and giving his own theories every so often. Was she always this obsessed with her? He had asked. Yes, first there was Taylor Swift, and then there was you, I replied, taming the moment. He had been quiet after that statement, seeming to be almost wounded by the words. I'm glad one of her idols remains, he said, and we left it at that. He pulled out his phone again from the innermost pocket of his suit coat and opened the voice recording app. "Before I show you, I have to know. Can you keep a secret?" he asked. What was one more? "For how long?" "Until tomorrow night." I paused. "I won't tell anyone." He smiled and kissed my cheek. "Isabel was right," he said as he pressed play and set the phone between us on the bench. The melody he played for me the first night in Malibu came through the speakers, and an extremely familiar voice floated over the notes. "No way," I said aloud. I was in disbelief. His smile grew impossibly large, and he let out a laugh. I gasped in surprise and happiness and clutched his hands in mine. I felt tears prick behind my eyes, beyond proud of him. "It's really her? She's the artist?" I asked in a rush. He squeezed my hands gently, nodding and smiling as Taylor's voice flowed around us. I dropped his hands and flung my arms around him, laughing in wonder. I held him tighter, relishing in this moment. "Hayes, this is amazing. I'm so proud of you," I said, still embracing him. His gift for music continued to shine. His initial career had long faded into the background, but his talent never waned. His art being recognized and cultivated by arguably the biggest artist the music industry has ever known. "Thank you, Solène," he said into my hair, his hand rubbing methodically over my spine. We parted, and he rested his hands on the piano and began to play along with the recording. He harmonized with Taylor's voice, and the resulting sound was breathtaking. "What is this called?" I asked, as his fingers continued to stroke over the keys. He finished singing the resounding chorus and said, "This is Lavender Haze." "I love it," I said with meaning. "Thank you," he said, voice ripe with sincerity. He concluded the song, letting his long hands rest on the ivory keys for a moment. How had someone so young accomplished so much? My heart was swelling, near bursting with emotion for this man. "Hayes? Yes? You are incredible." I leaned in closer at saying this and began toying with his skinny tie, my hands climbing higher and higher until I reached the base of his throat. All of the while he watched me, his eyes trailing along with my hands before resting on my face. "I love it," I repeated, and I didn't just mean the song. It was too soon, I knew. Too soon for me to say it to him, but it was there in my chest, a warm and burning feeling threatening to overcome me. The love I bore for him for years resurfacing. I tugged him closer to me, using his skinny tie, and he chuckled darkly. I pulled him so I laid back on the long, cool bench, his big body hovering over mine. "It loves you," he said, pressing his mouth to mine. Both of us not yet ready to speak what was in our hearts, but we knew. I woke up to a bright and beautiful LA morning and to an empty bed. I stretched slowly, feeling a pleasant ache between my legs. I had missed him, and it was clear he had missed me. We had tangled together on the piano, and again later, the second time much slower than the first, both of us subconsciously seeking the other out in our sleep, only really becoming aware when it was already happening. It still fascinated me that my body automatically and subliminally reacted to his and wanted him even when I was asleep. I crawled out of bed, my head hurting slightly from the night before. I slowly padded to the kitchen, past the large retractable windows in search of much-needed caffeine. I pulled a white mug down from the cabinet, poured myself a healthy cup of coffee, and turned around to face the patio. He was there, shirtless and in white shorts, perched on the edge of a lounge chair. He was facing the cliff, his chiseled shoulders and broad back moving as he strummed on his acoustic guitar. He stopped every so often to scribble something small in a moleskin notepad on the chair next to him before resuming playing. His hair was mussed from sleep, adorable and sticking up wildly. I leaned on the long island, holding the warm mug in my hands, and just observed him. He was so beautiful and so young. I looked down at my own toes and legs and torso and chest hidden by his classic black t-shirt. My legs still toned and my stomach still flat. For how long? No one knows. He was nearing 30 and I was nearing 50. The numbers ceased to scare me, but the possibility of his waning attraction did. He had worshipped me last night. His hands had roamed over me, followed by his lips and tongue, had whispered how much he adored me and how every inch of me stunned him. And I did believe him. But moments like this, observing him in his youthful elegance and beauty when I wasn't swept up with him, allowed my concern to flare. My trance was quickly interrupted. Hayes stopped his strumming and reached for his phone next to him on the chair. He looked at the screen and a slow and sure smile spread across his face. He opened the call and waved to whoever was calling. His tousled hair, smiling and talking animatedly with the person on the screen. He seemed truly happy and young and pleased to be seeing whoever it was. I watched him talk, watched the way his whole body seemed to exude happiness, pure joy. I approached the glass partitioning us slowly, not wanting to surprise him, part of me wanting to see who exactly he was talking to. Curiosity growing, I neared the handle and made to reach for it, to draw the glass open and step outside to join him. I clicked the lock out of habit, and at the sound of the metallic snap, Hayes whipped around from his perch on the chair. Surprise and worry bloomed on his face, a blush coloring his cheeks, almost as if he had been caught. Opening the door, I caught the remainder of his words. "Love you, cheers," and the sound of the call ending. He turned to face me then, pocketing his phone in his white shorts. "Hi," he said, patting the seat next to him. I walked slowly over, sliding into the seat next to him. He placed his elbows over the guitar to hold it in place and leaned over to press a kiss to my forehead. His composure resumed. He took my coffee cup from my hands and drank a sizable sip. I protested mildly as he finished and handed the mug back to me, significantly less full than moments before. "Hi," I said, peeking at him from the rim of the cup. He began playing a decidedly more upbeat tune. He had hummed and plucked out a few chords. I waited for him to offer an explanation about the call. Offer anything. I cleared my throat. "So," I began. He continued playing, but stopped humming and looked at me with an expression indicating I could ask my question. "Are you going to tell me who that was?" The notes continued. "My mum," the half-lie as before, and the same plummeting feeling in my gut. I set down my mug with a thud on the outdoor table, a bit of the brown liquid sloshing over the side. I sighed deeply, feeling my frustration with this young man growing. I set my head in my palms, my once fading headache making a second appearance. The playing ceased. "Soul," he said with a sigh that echoed mine. Evidently, he was feeling equally frustrated with me. "Are you going to tell me the truth about anything?" I asked softly, my head still in my hands, my temples pounding in time with my beating heart. "Is this where our relationship stagnated? No longer moving forward? Trapped between our secrets?" "I always tell you what I can," he said. I heard him set the guitar off to the side and felt his warm palm rest on my shoulder blade through the light fabric of the shirt. His thumb swept back and forth over my back and eventually trailed up to my cheek. He lifted my chin then, forcing my head to raise and meet his eyes. "Who was that?" I asked again, voice in a whisper. He closed his eyes, pressing them tightly together, as if it pained me to ask him that question, as if I was forcing him to confront something uncomfortable. "I told you. My mum. I'm going home after I finish rapping with Taylor, he said quietly. I thought that odd. He had not been particularly close with his parents before, yet he had talked with his mother more than he ever had during our past. He held my gaze, eyes moving over my face. To be with your mom and dad? I asked. Among other things, yes. I heard the validity in that statement. I nodded in acceptance, his firm fingers still grasping my chin. He withdrew slowly. I recalled my conversation with Lulette at the gallery just the night before. I decided then that I needed more. I deserved to know more. He had demons. We all do. But I was not afraid. He leaned in to offer his mouth to mine. How many, Hayes? I whispered, my lips brushing against his as I dared him with my words, dared him to answer me honestly. He paused then and pulled back to look at me, not at all off kilter by my somewhat random question. Do you really want to know? Yes. He closed his eyes again, the same pained expression reappearing. He swallowed then, his throat bobbing with the movement. 1. I think if he had hit me, it would have hurt less. I don't know what I was expecting. Celibacy was out of the question, but only one? One other woman that shared his bed after me? One other woman that knew his laugh and his body and his mouth and his fingers? Somehow it hurt more than if he had said 5 or 10 or 20. One singular person that had captured his heart after I released it from my hold. One woman, likely the one who reached him in his dreams. My heart gave a sudden sinking and aching beat. Sadness for him and for me. That this was the current state of our relationship. Me forcing him to share the uncomfortable parts of himself. All of these thoughts coalesced in rapid sequence. Okay, I said finally, unsure of what other word would suffice in this moment. Please, he said, eyes still closed. He shook his head and tucked his chin to his chest. I knew what that one word meant. He needed me to stop. For whatever reason, to stop pushing him. I melted then, my desire to obtain more of the truth falling short of my desire to comfort him, to show him the compassion I knew he deserved. I promised you I would tell you, and I meant it. Please, Selene, he whispered, his eyes downcast and his broad tanned shoulders rolling forward, caving in on himself. I straddled him then, settling comfortably astride him. I traced my fingers along his ringed digits to his wrists and placed his palms on either side of my hips. My hands continued their path up his toned forearms and biceps to the planes of his chest. I placed my hands across his broad chest and the smattering of his chest hair there. I picked up his face with my hands, raising his face to mine. Okay, I said, pressing our lips together gently. He deepened our kiss, fingers digging into my sides and pulling me flush to him, willing to move on from this and to accept his promise, for now. He lay back, pulling me on top of him, and traced his fingers slowly in the crease of my thighs, circling slower and closer to me with each passing second, making me forget everything as only Hayes Campbell could do, and I let him. Mom! Isabel's voice greeted me as she raced through LAX before flinging herself into my arms. She was tanned, her hair lighter, and her freckles more pronounced after her tropical vacation. Growing and changing in our time apart, Henry was shortly behind his big sister, his small feet pounding the tile as he raced to catch up with her. So when? He said, his young voice skewing the L in my name. I leaned down and patted his dark head affectionately before kissing Eva and Daniel on the cheek. On the short walk to my car, we discussed how the remainder of their trip was, exchanging pleasantries and stories of their trip. They had narrowly avoided an oncoming hurricane in Jamaica, and it seemed they escaped in time. I was picking up Isabel to spend 2 weeks with her in LA before she made the journey to Monterey for her last year at school. My girl growing up. We had no real plans for this time together. Beyond painting, back-to-school shopping, there was no agenda, only wanting to enjoy this special time with her, soaking up the last moments of her at home. Hayes's prediction had proven true. Isabel was gushing on the drive home. It seemed that Taylor had announced her 10th album Sunday, and my daughter was ecstatic. Through her teen-fueled excitement, I felt a familiar feeling creeping in my chest, that feeling of guilt, that I knew something she didn't, that I was keeping more from her than before somehow. As if dating a pop star without telling her the first time wasn't bad enough, coupled with the fact that I knew about this album before she did, double the sin. I almost told her, my guilt crawling up from my stomach through my chest and nearly bursting from my mouth. On the drive home, watching a movie, shopping at Bloomingdale's, so many opportunities, so many missed moments. Somehow, all of them, and none of them, were the right time. Hayes had called persistently throughout the week, and I declined seeing him, checking in on me to see if I had decided to tell my daughter about our relationship. I hadn't. I want you to tell her when you're ready, he said, the echo of the waves at his home reaching me and mine. It was late, and Isabel was already in bed. I sat at my rosewood table alone and tapped my hand restlessly, one finger after the other. Tap, tap, tap. I made my choice, he said again, reminding me. It almost seemed like he was scolding me, reinforcing that I was the barrier between Isabel and the truth. I know you have, I said, irritation snaking through my words. How was I to tell her what we were when I felt like there was a part of him I did not know yet? A part that began with an A. Silence spanned, and the exception of my drumming fingers and the crashing sea. Is it because of Annie? It's because of your evasiveness regarding her, yes, I said, that initial irritation sparking into something larger. After his admission in Malibu this week, I still felt as though I didn't know what exactly he was keeping from me, and that wounded me. I too wanted to be truthful with my daughter, wanted to have her support and knowledge and understanding, to be free of the weight of lies between me and part of my heart. His insistence on me revealing our secret to her when he continued to keep part of himself shielded from me was hypocritical at best and bordering on unfair. He sighed through the phone and said nothing. Look, I know you have Isabel for the next few weeks, and I've gathered that you won't see me when she's here, which I respect and I understand. I'm leaving in 3 days. My work with Taylor is done, and I'm going to London. Join me there. I'll tell you whatever you want to know, he said, voice coming out in a clipped tone. Short. My restless fingers stopped at the news. I assumed he would remain for longer, that I would have more time with him here. I was a mix of disappointment and apprehension. I couldn't see him with Isabel here. My heart wouldn't let me. How could I explain that the thought of lying to her and evading her during her last summer before college felt like a punch to the gut? A transgression far worse than what I had already committed, sneaking around my own daughter in our own home. Mom? Came a soft voice from behind me in the hallway. I jumped in surprise, my knees slamming into the table, causing me to curse quietly. I turned around, keeping the phone to my ear. Isabel stood there in her baby blue sleep shorts and matching button-down hair in disarray. I think I have a fever. Can you check for me? She asked, eyes bleary from sleep and possibly sickness. It was something I had always done for her since she was a small child, resting my cheek against her forehead and my hand on her neck to feel the temperature. Half of the time she did have one, and all of the time it made her feel better. Sure, Peanut, I'll be right there, I said. She nodded and turned away from me drowsily, retreating back to her bedroom. Is that her? He asked. I waited until I heard the closing of her door to respond. Yes. Are you going to accept my invitation? I hesitated briefly, mulling over my options. I would not have long to stay there, possibly only a week. My presence was required in Miami and Paris to continue to push for the gallery opening in October. Work never stops. But the way he dangled it there, promising to tell me whatever I wanted to know, to reach that sheltered part of himself, to know him now, it was too great a temptation to pass up. "Okay," I said finally. "Okay," he said, sounding almost resigned, as if he knew I would not last much longer without knowing the truth. "Hayes?" "Yes?" "Thank you." He chuckled at that, his raspy voice floating through the speakers, singing and working so much even his laugh had been affected by the long hours. "I'll see you soon," I said, and then hung up. I went to find Isabel, thermometer and ibuprofen in hand. I opened her door. Gone were the Keep Calm and Carry On posters and Hollywood Regency era decor. Her room was a model of her, organized and chaotic, our watercolors we had painted over the years framed along the far wall. She lay there, curled neatly into her white comforter, brown hair splayed behind her and lashes dormant on her round cheeks. I stroked her slender arm with my fingers, and she stirred slightly, rolling over to face me. Leaning down, I swept my hair over my shoulder and placed my cheek on her forehead and placed one hand behind her delicate neck. She did indeed feel warm to the touch. I slightly opened the case holding the thermometer and slid underneath her arm. We waited for the indicator to go off. "Mom, was that your boyfriend?" she asked, circles under her beautiful eyes peering up at me from her pillow. I waited to answer. So long, the timer went off on the thermometer. 101. "Yes, Peanut," I said, leaning to the bedside table to open the bottle of medicine I had brought with me. She said nothing, just nodded in response. "How high is it?" she asked, taking the ibuprofen and water and downing them in one gulp. 101. "I don't think you should go see Henry tomorrow. We can talk to Eva and change things around." She groaned slightly. She had been looking forward to seeing her baby brother and spending the evening with them. She nodded in defeat. She lay back on the pillow and twirled the end of my hair in her fingers, toying with the brown strands that were so similar to her own. "I'm going to see him in London in a few weeks," I said, deciding to offer her a morsel of the truth, to practice what I had been craving from Hayes, sharing something, anything with her, to ease the burden of our lies on my consciousness. Her lips lifted in a tired smile, and she nodded, seeming happy that I shared something with her, that this small facet of the truth pleased her, made tears prick behind my eyes. My selfless and wonderful daughter. Oh, how things had changed. "Will you tell me more after?" she asked, removing her hand from her hair and tucking it underneath her chin. She burrowed down into her pillows and shifted her comforter so only a sliver of her face showed, her cheeks pink and rosy due to fever. I stroked her hair over the curve of her small ear, remembering when she was a child, and I used to do the same in her crib, then her small bed, before she finally got too old and wouldn't let me do it, except for when she was sick. I crawled into bed behind her, joining her under the covers and snaking my arm around her shoulders, pulling her close to me. I stroked her pale arm, and she pressed her warm body closer to mine. Her breathing slowed into a relaxed pace, somewhere between wakefulness and slumber, when I finally spoke, unsure if she heard me. It didn't matter. "I promise I will tell you," I said softly, and I meant it.